Hi, welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of Everyday NLP Bites. My name is Florence Madden. I'm an NLP trainer and coach based in Cumbria in the north of England. And I'm also the author of 2 books. The first of these is called The Intention Impact Conundrum, which is based on the Personal Effectiveness at Work course that I run several times a year in the Lake District, which includes not just NLP concepts, but other things as well that I think are pretty important to our effectiveness in everyday life. And the second is Everyday NLP that I co-wrote with my friend and associate, Eleni Sarantonu of Life Spheres. And this book forms pre-course reading for our certificated NLP courses. Both books are available on Amazon. So for this season of podcasts, I'm going to be basing this on the NLP presuppositions. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, a body of work that has its origins in the 1970s when a group of people, Richard Bandler, John Grinder, and initially a man called Frank Puselic, became really curious at how people who have achieved excellence in a number of areas of life, how they do that. And they started to look at how they did achieve that excellence. And that is a process called modeling. Looking at how people do things, looking at the language that they use, but also looking at what are the beliefs that are there running when they are achieving that excellence and achieving those results. And what are the attitudes that they're taking? And the beliefs and attitudes that they hold enable them to come across authentically and effectively. And it's those beliefs and attitudes that those exemplars were exhibiting and living that are actually the origin of these NLP presuppositions. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that my backdrop here has a number of these presuppositions on it. That was actually a request from someone who's been on a course with me, and he said, for the next series of podcasts, have those bubbles behind you. For him, it was really an anchor to help him remember those presuppositions, which we can also refer to as beliefs, and you'll hear me refer to quite frequently as attitudes as well. So, what's so important about beliefs and attitudes? Well, what we believe about ourselves, other people, or about a situation really has a huge impact on how we behave and therefore on the outcomes that we achieve. A story about Houdini, I think, kind of illustrates this. At one time, Harry Houdini, the escapologist, was challenged to come to England to try to break out of a safe that they claimed was, well, this was impossible. Houdini couldn't resist the challenge, so he travelled to England and he was bound and locked in the safe, or so he thought. And of course, he went through all his normal manoeuvres. After a while, his normal manoeuvres weren't working. He was trying to pick the lock of the safe and wasn't experiencing any success at all. And he became so frustrated he started to pull at the lock. And eventually he was exhausted and he just sat down and he leant against the door of the safe, which moved and swung open. The door had never been locked in the first place, but in Houdini's mind, it was just as secure as if it had been locked. So what we believe is our reality. And a lot of the things, that we believe, a lot of the attitudes that we hold do ensure our success in life. And conversely so, sometimes we have beliefs and attitudes that limit our success and happiness. And that's what these presuppositions, or where these presuppositions can really help us. Over these 8 podcasts, I'm actually going to look at 9 of these presuppositions. There's about 16 to 18 of them in total, depending on where you look, some of which I've already dealt with in the first season of podcasts. But the one that I'm focusing on today is one that I regard as kind of the daddy of them all, really, which is that everyone has a different map of the world. In the first season of podcasts, I pointed out that, well, kind of the obvious, really, that we do have a unique view of the world. We've been brought up in different families, gone to different schools, had different life experiences, gone different places on holiday, worked for different organizations or run our own businesses, whatever. But no one else on this planet has lived the same life as you. And therefore, nobody sees the world in exactly the same way that you do. It follows then that it makes sense particularly when we're interacting with other people, to expect people to have a different viewpoint, maybe quite similar to ours, but it's not going to be exactly the same. And where it is different is to respect other people's viewpoint. You can respect someone else's viewpoint without having to agree with it. The key thing is, though, that when you do treat someone else's view with respect, even if you don't agree with it, the likelihood is that they're more willing to listen and take on board your viewpoint as well. And that's pretty important, whether you're looking within the work situation or in any of your other relationships. Because how we see it is our interpretation. John Lennon said, reality leaves a lot to the imagination. And wasn't he spot on with that? It is just how we see it. Which brings in this second presupposition, that the map is not the territory. If you had a map of where you're listening or watching this podcast now, it wouldn't be the actual area. It would be somebody's projection, somebody's interpretation, someone's representation, you might say, of that area. It wouldn't actually be that soil. So when we take a view of something, it is our view. It's not necessarily the truth. It's not necessarily what happened. It can be very easy to assume that we know what happened in a particular situation, or even more so, to think that we know what someone's motives are. And regrettably, sometimes we then act accordingly. If we recognize, though, that how we see it isn't necessarily how it is, that it is simply our interpretation or our view, we might be more curious to ask questions, find out more rather than make assumptions. And that will have a huge knock-on effect to our relationships with other people as well. Someone said to me on a course, Florence, but of course in the real world. And I looked at him and I said, and what makes you think that I don't live in the real world as well? And he looked at me and laughed and said, I hadn't thought about it that way. But it's so easy just to see the world from our point of view. And sometimes that excludes other people. It can also exclude a lot of learning. Because when we recognize that other people have a different viewpoint and we pay attention to that, maybe someone is giving their view on a piece of work that we've done. And if we look at it and think about it as criticism and close down to it, then we're really missing an opportunity. If, on the other hand, we treat it with respect, then we actually are likely to learn something and perhaps make that piece of work even better. So, respecting other people's maps of the world and realizing that our own is only an interpretation are really valuable, not just in helping us to learn, but in actually improving our relationships with other people. When I was preparing this podcast, I had a message from someone who was on a course with me some years ago. And it was actually recalling these very presuppositions and talking about how all those years ago, getting this idea that everyone a different map of the world, what a difference that had made in his life and work. So I think that was even more reinforcement of the importance of taking that on board. So I want to finish on a quote from Nietzsche, who said, "There are no facts, only interpretations." And that is something worth remembering, both to keep ourselves calm and to keep ourselves curious and learning. Thank you for listening or watching this podcast. The second one will be along in a week's time, and I hope you'll join me then. Thank you.